Life Stories brings you a tale of family, betrayal, and an unexpected rise to success. On Christmas Eve, Olivia Parker was cut out of her family's will, cast aside for choosing passion over prestige. But instead of falling, she rose higher than anyone expected. With a forgotten inheritance, a dream, and sheer determination, she built an empire from scratch while watching her family's once powerful legacy crumble. But was it revenge? Or something more? Subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's journey. Let's dive into a story of resilience, redemption, and the power of believing in yourself. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, given that it contained just a single sheet of paper. My father's stern expression told me everything I needed to know before I even opened it. This wasn't going to be a merry Christmas Eve. I sat on the velvet couch in our family's grand living room, my fingers brushing over the thick paper, hesitating. The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting a golden glow over the twinkling Christmas tree. But none of its warmth reached me. Madison, my older sister, perched elegantly on the arm of my mother's favorite leather chair, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she idly twisted it around her wrist. She had unwrapped it just moments before. A gift from our parents, one of many they showered upon her without hesitation. "Well," she prompted, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Aren't you going to open it?" I looked up at my father, Richard, and my mother, Diane, seated across from me. My mother didn't even glance my way, her focus entirely on the red wine swirling in her glass. The lawyer, Ernest, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a most unusual holiday guest. And yet, he was the only one who seemed remotely aware of the weight of the moment. Taking a steadying breath, I slid my finger under the envelope's flap and pulled out the paper inside. My eyes scanned the formal words, but the meaning struck me before I even processed the details. I had been cut out of the will. Completely. "I don't understand," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "You're disinheriting me?" My mother let out a soft sigh, still not looking up. "It's for the best, dear. You've made your choices, and we've made ours." "My choices?" A dry, humorless laugh escaped my lips. "You mean choosing to start my own business instead of working for the family law firm?" My father scoffed, his deep voice laced with disappointment. "A bakery, Olivia. After everything we invested in you, the education, the connections, you want to throw it all away to make cupcakes? They're not just cupcakes." I shot back, my voice rising. "It's my dream." "Dreams don't pay the bills," he snapped. "Madison understands responsibility. She's already proving herself at the firm. Meanwhile, he gestured toward me as if I were some wayward child in need of correction. "You've chosen to abandon your family's legacy." I turned to Madison, whose smirk only widened. "Don't be so dramatic, Liv," she said with feigned sympathy. "You knew this was coming. What did you expect?" I looked back down at the paper in my hands. The Christmas lights reflected off the glossy finish, creating small, dancing patterns. My mind flickered back to childhood memories of waving sparklers on summer nights. Back when family had meant something different, back when I had felt safe, included, loved. Foolish me, thinking I still belonged here. Slowly, deliberately, I folded the paper and smoothed my dress as I stood. "Actually," I said, forcing a smile, "I expected better from my parents." Olivia Ernest, the lawyer, hesitated, clearing his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss this after the holidays." "There's nothing to discuss," my mother said coolly, finally meeting my gaze. Her eyes were hard, unyielding. The decision was final. A lump formed in my throat as I walked toward the coat rack, slipping on my wool jacket. The fabric felt scratchy against my neck, but I barely noticed. "Where do you think you're going?" my father demanded. "We haven't even had dinner yet." "I've lost my appetite," I replied, reaching for my purse. I paused at the doorway, turning back one last time. You know what's funny? You all think you're punishing me. But really, I exhaled, thinking about the secret I had been keeping. You might be punishing yourselves more than you realize. Madison's perfectly manicured brows furrowed. What's that supposed to mean? I ignored her, adjusting my scarf. Merry Christmas, I said, my voice light, almost cheerful. And good luck. Something tells me you're going to need it. With a satisfying thud, the heavy oak door closed behind me, sealing me off from the only world I had ever known. Outside, the snow fell softly, muffling the distant sound of careless in the neighboring houses. The contrast between the warmth of their voices and the ice in my chest was almost cruelly poetic. I took a deep breath, my exhale turning to mist in the cold air, then pulled out my phone and dialed a familiar number. Natasha, I said when she picked up. Olivia, how did it go? I walked toward my car, my boots crunching in the fresh snow. Exactly how we expected. Are you okay? I glanced back at the house. The grand estate that had once been my childhood home. The golden lights from the windows glowed warmly against the frost-covered glass, making it look inviting, almost magical. But I knew better. I knew what was inside. And I knew I was never going back. I'm better than okay, I told her, a slow smile forming on my lips. Remember that thing we talked about? Yeah, I think it's time. As I drove away, my hands steady on the wheel, my heart lighter than it had been in years. One thought settled deep into my bones. They thought they were writing me out of their story, but they had no idea I was about to become the author of their downfall. 3 months earlier, I stood in front of a quiet, forgotten piece of my family's wealth, a lakefront vacation home in Michigan. Key in hand, snow blanketed the roof, untouched for years, and the windows were frosted over, as if sealing in the memories of summers long past. Natasha stood beside me, her arms crossed, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. And they seriously forgot they put this in your name? She asked, running a gloved hand along the railing of the porch. 5 years ago. For tax purposes, I explained, fitting the key into the lock. I guess when you have too many properties, you start losing track. Well, their loss is your gain. Natasha grinned as the door creaked open. Inside, time had stood still. The same pine furniture, the same blue and white nautical decorations, the same faint smell of cedar and dust. It was a museum of a life I no longer belonged to. How much do you think it's worth? Natasha asked, peering through the window at the frozen lake. I pulled out my phone, showing her the latest real estate estimate. Her eyes widened. Holy Olivia. That's enough to start your bakery. I exhaled slowly, running my fingers over the dusty wooden counter. A dream I had been holding onto for years, always out of reach, was suddenly possible. The down payment, the equipment, the first year's rent. I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. Natasha turned to me, her eyes sparkling. Your parents are going to lose their minds when they find out. That's the best part. I smiled. They won't find out until it's too late. Selling the house was easier than I expected. Turns out, lakefront property never really loses value. Within weeks, I had the funds in my account. A realtor's handshake sealing the deal. The next step, finding the perfect location. Downtown Milwaukee had been changing in recent years. New businesses, trendy cafes, and an influx of young professionals had transformed the area into something fresh and alive. I spent days scouting locations, until one morning, as I sipped burnt gas station coffee, I saw it. A corner shop with tall windows, exposed brick walls, and just enough space for both a cafe and a full bakery. The foot traffic was ideal. Nestled between an art gallery and a bookstore. I called Natasha. Found it, she asked immediately. Found it. Make an offer. Now. And I did. By the following week, The Magnolia Bakery and Cafe had an address. People always underestimate me, I told Ryan as we sat at a coffee shop, going over my business plan. Ryan, a friend from college who worked in commercial banking, had been skeptical at first. But after he took a bite of my latest recipe, a lavender honey cake, his expression changed entirely. Okay, he admitted, closing his eyes as he chewed. Scratch that. You're definitely doing this. That's not even my best recipe. I smirked, pulling out my laptop. Here. Look. He leaned in, studying the numbers, the projected costs, the potential revenue streams. After a moment, he glanced up. This is solid. Olivia, he admitted. But are you sure you're ready to burn bridges with your family? I closed my laptop, my jaw tightening. They burned it first. Silence stretched between us before he finally nodded. Then let's make this happen. The day I signed the lease, Natasha brought champagne to the empty storefront. To the Magnolia Bakery she toasted, clinking her paper cup against mine. And may your revenge be as sweet as your pastries. It's not revenge, I protested. She gave me a look. Honey, you're literally using their forgotten vacation home to fund your independence while their law firm is on the verge of collapse. That is premium revenge. I couldn't argue with that. The next morning, the contractors arrived. The transformation began. Every choice I made, the warm copper light fixtures, the handcrafted wooden tables, the marble-topped counters, felt like a step away from my family's shadow. The day we installed the sign, I stood across the street, watching the gold lettering catch the sunlight. Magnolia Bakery and Cafe. My dream. My name. My rules. My phone buzzed. A text from Madison. Mom and Dad are worried about you. They say you're not returning their calls. I typed back quickly. Been busy. Big things happening. Her response was immediate. Whatever. Just don't come crying to us when your little hobby fails. I smiled, pocketing my phone as the first delivery of professional baking equipment arrived. Let them think I was playing at business. Let them dismiss me one last time. Because in just 3 months, the smell of success would be impossible to ignore even from the windows of my father's law firm. Just 2 blocks away. 3 months later, the Magnolia Bakery was flourishing. The smell of freshly baked croissants and cinnamon rolls drifted through the downtown streets every morning, luring in a steady stream of customers. The cafe had become the talk of Milwaukee, with articles in food blogs praising its cozy charm and heavenly pastries. I was in the middle of piping delicate swirls of buttercream onto a batch of cupcakes when my phone buzzed. Madison. I almost ignored it. But something in me told me to answer. Well, she said, skipping any greeting. Are you the one who just bought that building on 3rd Street? I smiled to myself, remembering the real estate deal I had finalized last week. The success of the Magnolia Bakery had left me with enough capital to start investing in properties. A move that was both financially sound and, quite frankly, poetic justice. Actually, I said, wiping my hands on my apron, I'm in the process of buying 3 buildings on 3rd Street. Why? Silence. Then, in a voice far less composed, she demanded. That's where Dad was planning to expand the firm. Oh, really? I feigned innocence as I sprinkled edible gold dust onto a batch of macarons. Guess he'll have to find somewhere else. Property values are crazy downtown these days. You're doing this on purpose, aren't you? Doing what? I asked, enjoying every second. Running a successful business? Making smart investments? Isn't that what you all wanted me to do? Another pause. Then, her tone shifted. Mom wants to know if you'll come to dinner next week. I let out a breath of laughter. The audacity. Sorry, I'm catering the mayor's daughter's wedding that night. She scoffed. Seriously? Seriously. I leaned against the counter, watching customers file in for the afternoon rush. But hey, feel free to stop by the bakery sometime. We make an amazing humble pie. I hung up before she could respond. Okay. That was iconic, Natasha said, having overheard the conversation from the espresso station. I grinned, untying my apron. They thought I was playing games. They're just now realizing I was playing chess. Ryan walked in through the back door, holding a to-go coffee. Speaking of business, he said, lowering his voice. Word on the street is that your family's law firm isn't doing so hot. I raised an eyebrow. Oh. They've had to let go of 3 junior partners already. Their financial troubles are catching up with them, and some of their biggest clients are jumping ship. I returned to my cupcakes, carefully piping delicate roses onto each one. Is that so? You know, Ryan said, watching me work. Most people would feel bad about their family struggling. Most people's families wouldn't have disowned them on Christmas Eve for following their dreams. I set the piping bag down, meeting his gaze. Besides, I warned them. Sort of. Natasha added. I mean, you didn't tell them outright. But you definitely hinted at it. The bell above the door chimed, and a familiar voice rang through the cafe. Oh my God. Natasha gasped. You have to see this. She waved her phone in front of me, her face glowing with excitement. The local paper had just published their Best of Downtown list. Guess who was ranked number 1 in the food category? I took the phone from her, scrolling down to see a glossy photo of my bakery. My name beneath it. I laughed. Would you look at that? Ryan smirked. I'd say your little hobby is making some serious waves. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. Madison. I hesitated. Then, with a wicked grin, I answered. To what do I owe the pleasure? I asked. Her voice was sharp. All pleasantries gone. Is it true? You're the one who bought the entire block on 3rd Street. I glanced out the bakery window. Where? In the distance. I could see the high-rise office building where my father's firm was located. Yep. I said simply. She cut herself off, clearly struggling for words. You knew Dad needed those buildings. I picked up a tray of perfectly frosted cupcakes and carried them to the display case. Well, I said, savoring every syllable. Looks like he'll have to make other arrangements. It didn't take long for my mother to show up. I had barely finished restocking the pastry case when the bell above the door chimed and in she walked. Dressed in her usual tailored wool coat, her hair styled to perfection. Diane Parker had a presence elegant, composed, and cold as ever. But something was different this time. She hesitated at the entrance, her eyes sweeping over the bakery, taking in the warm glow of the copper light fixtures, the long line of customers, the baristas chatting over steaming cups of espresso. Her gaze landed on the gold lettering of the Magnolia Bakery and Cafe sign behind the counter, and I watched as her expression shifted from disdain to surprise. She wasn't just looking at a bakery. She was looking at proof that I had done exactly what she said I couldn't. I took my time before walking over. Mom, I greeted, wiping my hands on my apron. What can I get you? Our signature dream cake is featured in Food and Wine this month. She flinched at my casual tone, her lips pressing into a thin line. Olivia, she said stiffly, your father and I need to discuss something with you. Something important. I gestured around the bustling cafe. I'm a little busy here. You know how it is. Running a successful business and all. Her jaw clenched. Please, she said. And for the first time in years, I heard something real in her voice. A crack in her perfect facade. It was desperation. I exhaled slowly, pretending to consider. Then, with an exaggerated glance at my schedule, I said, I do have a cancellation for my last appointment today. I could meet you at 5. I paused deliberately, then added with a sweet smile, at my office. Of course. Her expression flickered, but she nodded stiffly and left. Behind the counter, Natasha was practically vibrating with anticipation. Oh, my God. She clutched her coffee cup like it was a lifeline. Did that just happen? Did the Diane Parker, the woman who didn't even blink when she disinherited you, just come in here and ask for a meeting? I wiped down the counter. Seems like it. Natasha leaned in. And you're going to make them grovel? Right. I glanced toward the window, where my mother's figure disappeared into the busy street. No, I said simply, watching the Magnolia Bakery logo reflect in the glass. I'm going to make them eat cake. At exactly 5 o'clock. My parents walked into the bakery. I had closed early, sending my staff home. Only Natasha remained, pretending to clean tables while blatantly eavesdropping. Would you like some tea? I asked, gesturing to the vintage tea set I had arranged. Earl Grey. Your favorite. Mom. My father. Richard. Scowled. This isn't a social call. But my mother put a hand on his arm. Tea would be lovely, she said. Sitting down. Her eyes kept darting around, taking in the press clippings on the walls, the sleek display cases, the sheer success of it all. I poured 3 cups and placed a plate of lavender shortbread in the center. So, I said, settling in across from them, what brings you to my little hobby? Dad's jaw tightened. We need to discuss a business proposition. Business? I raised an eyebrow. I thought making cupcakes wasn't a real business. Mom shifted uncomfortably. Things have changed. Oh. I feigned curiosity. What kind of things? Dad cleared his throat. The firm is facing some temporary difficulties. I took a sip of tea. That's not what I heard. Their eyes snapped to mine. I set my cup down with deliberate slowness. I heard you've laid off staff, lost major clients, and your credit rating is in the toilet. My father's expression darkened. How did you? Brett. I answered simply. Turns out, having friends is more useful than having connections. My mother set her cup down with a sharp clatter. We're here because we need a partner. Someone with liquid assets and business acumen. I blinked. Then, before I could stop myself, I laughed. Business acumen? I echoed. 3 months ago. You said I was throwing my life away. We were wrong. My mother's voice was quiet, almost soft. What you've built here, it's impressive. Dad's mouth pressed into a thin line, but he finally forced out the words, very impressive. The air in the room shifted. For the first time in my life, my parents weren't looking at me with disappointment. They were looking at me with respect. I leaned back in my chair. So let me get this straight. I folded my arms. You want me to bail you out? After cutting me out of your lives? Silence. Mom swallowed. Name your price. I studied them for a long moment. Then, without breaking eye contact, I reached for the folder they had placed on the table and ripped it in half. Their shock was almost satisfying. I don't want your firm, I said. I don't want a partnership. I don't want a seat at the table. I stood up, gathering the torn papers. I just wanted to see you realize that I never needed you. Their faces fell. Dad's hands clenched into fists. Olivia. Be reasonable. No, I cut him off. You weren't reasonable when you told me I wasn't worth keeping in your will. You weren't reasonable when you dismissed my dreams. I met their eyes. Unshaken. So now, you get nothing. Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Is there really no way back from this? I exhaled, forcing my shoulders to relax. Old wounds don't heal overnight. I reached into my bag, pulling out a small box. Here, I said, sliding it across the table. My mother hesitated before opening it. Inside, neatly arranged, were gold-dusted chocolate truffles. I call them humble beginnings, I said lightly. Dark chocolate. A hint of bitterness. Covered in gold leaf. Dad's face turned red. Is this a joke? No, I replied, picking up my coat. It's a reminder. Mom looked down at the truffles, then back at me. Sometimes, I said softly, you have to lose everything to appreciate what you had. I turned toward the door. Olivia, my father called after me. Voice gruff. Will we see you again? I paused. Then, without turning back, I said, the bakery's open Tuesday through Sunday, 9 to 6. You know where to find me. The morning after the meeting, I arrived at Magnolia Bakery to find Madison waiting outside. She was still in yesterday's clothes. Her arms wrapped tightly around herself despite the mild chill in the air. Her usual polished image was cracked. Her hair undone. Dark circles beneath her eyes. She had been here for hours. I exhaled. Have you been out here all night? No, she hesitated. Just since 5. I unlocked the door, letting her in. And she stepped inside, looking around the empty cafe as I flipped on the warm lights. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. I've been thinking. About what you said. About proof. I walked past her, starting my morning routine, firing up the ovens, checking the prep list, measuring ingredients. Madison followed me. I want a job. The measuring cup in my hand slipped slightly. I barely caught it before it clattered to the counter. I turned to face her. Excuse me? I want to work here. She straightened her shoulders, as if that could somehow make the request sound less insane. For you. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. Nothing. Instead, she swallowed hard. I need to understand. Understand what? I asked, crossing my arms. Madison glanced around at the cafe, at the fresh loaves of sourdough I had proofed overnight, at the handwritten chalkboard menu that I had designed from scratch. She took in everything, the place, the people, the success, her gaze lingering on the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. How you did this, she admitted finally. How you knew it would work. How you're so confident now. I studied her face, looking for any sign of manipulation. She was desperate. But not for power. Not for control. For purpose. I sighed, wiping my hands on my apron. You've never worked a service job in your life. I know. You don't even know how to make a latte. I'll learn. I shook my head. You don't get it. Madison. This isn't some corporate internship. You don't get to start at the top. I don't want to. Her voice cracked slightly. I'll start at the bottom. Washing dishes. Sweeping floors. Whatever you need. I exhaled, feeling something shift in my chest. For the first time. She wasn't just Madison Parker, the golden child of the family. She was just Madison. And she had nothing left to lose. I reached under the counter, pulled out a spare apron, and tossed it to her. She caught it. Startled. Start by wiping down all the tables. I said. Then we'll talk. She blinked, clearly waiting for more. There was no more. She had asked to start at the bottom. So that's exactly where she would begin. For the next few hours. I watched her. Madison Parker, the girl who had once walked through life with entitlement and ease, was now scrubbing tabletops and sweeping floors. She didn't complain. Not once. By the lunch rush, her perfectly manicured hands were raw from constantly dipping them in dishwater. Your hands are bleeding, I noted as she wiped down the counter. She glanced down at her cracked, red knuckles. It's fine. I shook my head, reached into my bag, and handed her a bottle of hand cream. Her brows furrowed. What's this for? First lesson of service work, I said, tossing a cloth over my shoulder. Take care of yourself. Or you can't take care of business. The bell above the door chimed. I looked up, bracing myself. It was Mom. She froze the moment she saw Madison in an apron, handing a fresh cup of coffee to a customer. Her expression was pure horror. What are you doing? She demanded. Madison didn't even flinch. Working. Mom's eyes snapped to me. Is this some kind of punishment? No, I said smoothly, arranging fresh pastries in the display case. This is her choice. Mom's mouth opened, then closed. She turned back to Madison, eyes wild. But you're a lawyer. Was. Madison corrected, shouldering past her to wipe down a table. Mom turned back to me, her voice dropping. I came to tell you. She hesitated. She looked tired. Not just physically. Emotionally. We sold the house, she admitted finally. We're moving into a small apartment next week. I didn't react. Good. She blinked. Caught off guard. Maybe you'll learn something, I added, tapping the sugar dispenser. Mom exhaled, pressing her fingers to her temple. Your father's looking for work. Really? I raised an eyebrow. What kind? Anything, she admitted, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. But no one's hiring. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. Reputation is exactly what you earned. Her face paled. The lunch rush picked up again, forcing her to step aside. She lingered by the counter, watching as Madison scrubbed floors, watching as I moved from station to station, commanding the room effortlessly, watching everything she had once dismissed as a silly little dream turn into something unstoppable. You're good at this, she said suddenly. I didn't even glance up. I know. She hesitated. Would you consider hiring your father? I laughed. Not a mocking laugh. Not cruel. Just unbelieving. Not a chance, I said, loading fresh almond croissants into the oven. Her face fell. But, I added after a pause, there's a new cafe opening in one of my buildings next month. I handed her a business card. I'll put in a word with the owner. Her fingers tightened around the card. As what? Dishwasher, I said simply. Same place Madison started. She flinched, her perfect image shattering for the first time. I turned back to the counter, dusting powdered sugar onto pastries. How did we get here? She whispered. Madison answered before I could. By believing our own hype, she said. Stacking cups. By thinking we were better than everyone else. By treating Olivia like she was nothing. Mom swallowed. Table 8 needed their check. Madison wiped her hands on her apron. I'll get it, she said. And for the first time in our lives, she didn't sound like my sister. She sounded like an employee. 6 months after Madison started working at Magnolia Bakery, I stood in front of my newest acquisition, a 3-story Victorian building on Main Street. The morning sun reflected off the fresh gold lettering, Magnolia Enterprises. Not bad for a girl who just makes cupcakes, Ryan teased. Speaking of which, Madison called, stepping out of my car, carrying a box of pastries. She had traded designer suits for jeans and an apron, her hands permanently dusted with flour. Dad was still washing dishes at the cafe. Mom had earned a supervisor role at a department store. The family name once ruled courtrooms, now it was whispered in the business world. As we clinked coffee cups, I smiled. Success wasn't about revenge. It was about proving that sometimes the sweetest victory is just desserts. Subscribe to Life Stories for more.